One of the things that I think it's important to bear in mind is the extent to which the situation of women in many Muslim countries has a lot to do with a tribal form of social organization rather than with something like Sharia law, right? There's a very clear precedent in what the Prophet did in, setting aside a specific time for women to come and learn with him. Sharia law says specifically you cannot prevent women from leaving the house to go and get education. This is not a Sharia law. This is one that is, for whatever reason, popular among the people in power in the particular tribal context of Afghanistan. We might say the same thing about something like honor killings, right? Honor killings are not allowed under Sharia law. It's really it's really a very tribal conception that women are somehow owned by their families and therefore can be, disposed of, so to speak, when they shame the family in some way. This is really a tribal attitude, and not only is it a tribal attitude, but it's a tribal attitude that in many ways the example of the Prophet was trying very hard to overcome, and many of the teachings were trying very hard to overcome, right? The idea that somehow families had the right of life or death over the women in their families because of matters of honor. One 18th century commentator who was commenting on the verse that prohibits men from killing, or the verse that says it's a terrible thing for men to commit female infanticide and feel dishonor for having daughters. Says that, Islam came and said that having daughters was honorable. Right? There's all of these hadith of the Prophet in that book, if we have the moral teachings of Islam book, that say, any man who has 2 daughters and takes good care of them, this kind of thing, is guaranteed paradise and so on. And of course, you have the example of the Prophet's treatment of his own daughters. All of these things were really, Islam was really trying, when it came, it was really trying to overcome some of these very brutal aspects of tribal culture. But when you go to a place like Afghanistan, what you see is tribal culture, and you see that taking over there. And so it's not really Sharia law, it's not really Islamic, it's really sort of tribal law. And
Quran?
Yes. Yeah. For example, in Pakistan, parts of Pakistan, you have state courts, you have Sharia courts, and you have tribal courts. And they operate under different systems. And I personally think this idea of, in some ways I think it ends up being a kind of response to certain things that happen in the modern world, a kind of reaction to that in some ways. But it's precisely this kind of tribalism. When I read the Quran and I look at the example of the Prophet, it seems to be saying the community should be moving away from and not really practicing anymore.
Literacy rates. Mm-hmm. Is that connected to, in these tribal regions in Afghanistan, if people can't read for themselves and they're just having one person in power tell them what this is saying, how much of a problem is that creating? And
it's creating worse. If women don't know what their rights are, if they can't read the text, then they don't really have a basis from which to argue. But again, there is nothing to suggest that men should be more literate than women. There's nothing to prevent women from learning to read. If anything, everyone was encouraged to read.